What's up, everybody? Okay, I'm doing this for a third time. This is a subject that I really don't know how to articulate well, but I think just showing you, you'll get it. But I knew from the beginning of the idea of mudflood, the abstract idea of mudflood, catastrophes, that these were really important to our history. And yeah, now there's all kinds of people that talk about these past cycles, but little of this was known 4 years ago when we began all this. And recently, I've just been doing vids on our recent timeline of things. But this goes back to the beginning of our time. So let me just give you an example with the ancient Greeks. And I kind of trip out on this early picture of Athens. I'm just literally going, that's it? That's a rather small community with a really big temple. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that right now. Like I said, I'm just going to throw some stuff at you here and then we'll try to make sense of it. First off, it's a temple to Zeus, the mightiest of the gods, the 12 Olympians. So, what is there 12 of? The 12 signs of the zodiac. This is the same all around the world. The Romans called him Jupiter, the same as us. The Greeks called him Zeus. The Inca called him Viracocha, and they're all talking about Jupiter. All the way up to the 1800s, this guy wrote the book The Smoky God, and the Smoky God is the inner Earth sun, according to that book. But it just goes to show that everybody referred to the lights in the heavens as the gods in the heavens. So let's take Hephaestus, for example, and you'll see the different levels to this. Hephaestus is the Greek god of blacksmiths and craftsmen, fire, metallurgy, metalworking, and volcanoes. His Roman counterpart is Vulcan. So I think everybody can easily see a correlation between metallurgy and blacksmithing and a volcano. I can't remember the guy's name for the life of me, but there was one main author 100 years ago or so that brought Greek mythology to the limelight. A lot like Edward Gibbon's in The Rise and Fall of Empires about the Roman Empire, pretty much the Bible of it. And those have become the historiography of the subject. But the true Greek mythology was handed down through oral tradition. And so some of it is watered down, rationalizing things in a modern manner. So let's look at one version of Hephaestus. According to myth, he was born lame and was cast from heaven in disgust by his mother Hera, and again by his father Zeus after a family quarrel. Then he was brought back to Olympus by Dionysius and was the only god to have returned after exile. Okay, it all sounds like innocuous Greek drama. Well, let's look at another version of this. Hephaestus was thrown out of Mount Olympus after a bad argument with Jupiter. He literally fell on a lovely island, creating a deep hole into a high mountain. He then decided to use that mountain as a blacksmith forge. That's why Etna now explodes with fire and sparks. Now, I'm sorry, I hate to sound like a dummy that swings a hammer that couldn't possibly understand the gentle nuances of Greek drama. But didn't they just say that something we're calling a god here got into a fight with Jupiter or Zeus, whatever you want to call him, and was thrown down, hit the ground, and formed a volcano? Because that's what it sounds like to me. Not only that, but after passing by Zeus, evidently it took a full day, and he fell on the island of Lemnos. Not just anywhere, but right there, Mount Etna. And it's not the first time. He had been thrown out of Olympus, the zodiac, more than once. From our view on Earth, the sun, the moon, all the planets travel through a straight line that we call the ecliptic. And in the background of that, you see the 12 signs of the zodiacs, the stars back behind all of it. So Hephaestus got into it with Jupiter and was thrown down to Earth. All the ancient cultures remember the golden age of man, Eden, peace on earth, and they remember the war in heaven, quite literally. And they even remember a time before there was a moon. That may sound absolutely bonkers to some. People say they remember a time before the mountains, too. But it all ties together to ancient events that they tell us today are absolutely impossible. Our solar system's been the exact same way for billions of years, blah, blah. Well, let me read you this. Democritus and Anaxagoras mention that there was a time when no moon could be seen in the night skies. In describing the history of the Greek region of Arcadia, Aristotle writes that Pelasgians lived in the area since very old times, at a time when the moon did not exist. Apollonius from Rhodes mentions something similar. He talks about a time when not all of the celestial objects existed in the sky. That's an important point there. Before the time of Deucalion, the Greek version of Noah. Now, this could have been the same person. I guess it really depends on how far back in time this really goes, but you've got Noah, Deucalion, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Utnapishnu. Everybody remembers the golden age of man. They used to live to be 800-900 years old. And look at this guy. That's a lion. So things fundamentally changed for life on Earth. People went from living 800 to 900 years and being 20 feet tall down to what we are today over the course of a few generations. And when you put all this together, the moon didn't exist at that time and different stars in the night sky. Before the time of Deucalion's generation, when the moon did not exist and the only humans that existed were the Pelasgians living on the mountains of Arcadia, a region in Greece, these inhabitants of Arcadia were also known as the Proselines, meaning those that were before the moon. Ovid wrote the Arcadians are said to have possessed their land before the birth of Zeus even, and that folk is older than the moon. A really good video to check out is Thunderbolt's Project, Symbols of an Alien Sky, and it's all just based off of old mythology. But they theorized that all the planets were aligned directly overhead. And there's a couple different versions of what happened to change everything. I can't remember which one they go with, but there's like Tiamat hitting Earth and creating the moon. As far as that goes, Hephaestus, supposedly one of the only gods to return to Olympus after exile, but that could be a comet's eccentric orbit. But it doesn't matter which version you use, they all say that our universe tore itself apart and got reorganized. And these are the oldest stories we have of our species. In Plato's Timaeus, which is our sole source of information on Atlantis, writes about this in Timaeus, a conversation with Egyptian priests, basically. How Pharonius was the first man, just like Adam from the Bible, Adamu from the Sumerians, and then he tells the legend of Deucalion and the flood, how they survived it to give their genealogies. And the Egyptian priests say, you guys are like children. You remember just one of these cycles where there have been and there will be many and diverse destructions of mankind, of which the greatest are by fire and water, and lesser ones by countless other means, like our little couple 100-year GSMs. So let's talk about the Egyptian creation myth and Apophis. Notice how he's forming the infinity symbol over and over. That's also known as the analemma. If you were to take a picture of the moon every day for a year, that's what you get. But you guys probably heard the first level of the Apophis mythology. Every night, Ra goes down into the underworld at sunset and fights Apophis every night, represented by the serpent, and emerges victorious every morning. Well, listen to the Egyptians' basically creation myth and see if any of this sounds familiar. The Egyptians viewed the universe as an incessant sequence of beginnings and endings of death and renewal, something like an unbroken series of cosmic breaths. Each inhale raising the world from chaos, and each exhale returning the world to chaos. In fact, the ebb and flow of the Nile, marked by inundation in the spring and recession during the summer, was viewed as a microcosm of the universe. There's a strong argument to be made for Apophis being the most powerful monster in all mythology, because when we talk about the most powerful monsters, we're talking about monsters who have either killed gods or who at least have god-killing power. The eyes of Apophis, especially perilous with his terrible roar, said to be deafening, able to resound throughout the entire underworld. The movement of his body shook the earth, causing quakes and treacherous waves. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but anything esoteric that you want to look up has been used in a video game, and it was like that basically from the beginning of the internet. But it's really interesting how they're portraying the Eye of Apophis here. It's a bunch of lightning bolts going to these small rocks, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. Let me finish out this thought. Everybody has heard how the pyramids align with the stars of Orion's belt. To the Egyptians, this was Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. I talked about this kind of in depth in a recent video here about the reasoning behind this and what the ancients were actually thinking. They did believe in the as above, so below paradigm, and the Nile is symbolic of the Milky Way. You can see the belt of Orion is just on the edge of the Milky Way, just like the pyramids are just on the edge of the Nile. And I think they were literally trying to get the stars in heaven to stay the way they are, because they've watched the universe tear itself apart before. The Inca did the same thing. Their constellations were actually the dark spots in the Milky Way, but they did the exact same thing. And the Inca are the last of the true ancients. So back to Apophis, the god killer. What are the gods? The lights in the heavens. So it has taken those out before. And we have a comet Apophis coming Friday the 13th, 2029. This is a new article on this from July 23rd. This is what I got when I looked up Apophis just now. Great, they'll handle it as good as the Big Island right now. They say that this is going to miss us, but let me show you something about this. This is supposed to be its trajectory. It's in red, and watch how it swoops in front, and then we go through the tail of it. It swoops in front again and again. So it's supposed to do multiple loop-de-loops right in front of us. This is what the last druid said in a documentary 20 years before the invention of the internet and anybody was talking about any of this. He says his order of druids came into existence after the last great cataclysm or catastrophe which affected the world, with these great and terrible impacts on the earth by great electrical storms being caught up in the tails of meteors and showers of meteorites. Civilization as we know it was totally destroyed. By his reckoning, his order is 3,000 years old. He even talks about how they messed with the timelines. But this is the same event as Noah, as the Epic of Gilgamesh, as Duakleon. And if there is a bunch of loose debris following this comet and it's directly in front of us, this is exactly what I would expect to see. A bunch of electrically charged rocks raining down and shooting lightning bolts and all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm quite sure this is AI, but just to give you an idea, this is not AI. They drew this after the 1833 Leonids meteor shower. And we go through several meteor showers every year that is the leftover debris from comets. Now, I'm not trying to scare anybody here. This is just thought experiments. They say Apophis will fly right by, no big deal. And that may be the case. I just find it a very interesting name. And after watching this trajectory right in front of us, it really does make me wonder. But I like the Egyptians' approach to it of just saying, look, man, this has happened so many times you can't even count it. It's going to happen so many more times that you can't even count it. So if it's sunny out, enjoy the weather. If it's rainy out, enjoy the weather, because one of these days the ocean may fall on your head. And I don't know, hopefully this video turned out all right. The problem with getting started wasn't a lack of information. It's just that there's so much information out there. I had to focus in and decide which parts to actually use. You can't just throw everything out. But the bottom line here is the very oldest stories known to mankind tell of the destruction of the last world age and how the stars in the heavens weren't even the same. The moon wasn't even there. That we used to live 800 years and be 20 feet tall. Even the Egyptians in the Timaeus dialogue say that you Hellenes, you Greeks, are but remnants of these great and mighty men. Ragnarok in Norse mythology, it's not an event that's coming, it's an event that's happened and will happen again. Fimbulwinter is the 2 years of winter, that 2 to 3 years of winter that's associated with this. This is an actual old depiction of Odin, the one-eyed god, Jupiter, Zeus, Viracocha, and he's wearing the sun like a necklace because they're basically a binary system. And he's holding the cosmic thunderbolt that can be found in all of the ancient cultures. So it's not a problem of having enough information. It's where do you start with this? Do you start with the Sumerians? Do you start with the ancient Greeks? Notice how he is aiming the thunderbolt at the infinity sign serpent once again. And in case anybody has limited visualization skills, this is what we're talking about, is huge electrical discharges going off between planets. Major releases of electrical plasma energy, to the point that the ancients had to build these huge fallout shelters. Anyway, I think I've made my point. The concept of mudflood is old as time itself. Period. Static out.